My cheating wife reduced us to a contract, so I packed her things, opened the door, and delivered a calm, brutal revenge she could never control again. Yet the words left her mouth casually, like she was just stating a fact. No hesitation, no regret, just a simple observation, as if she were commenting on the weather or reminding me to take out the trash. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, watching her expression carefully. She wasn't angry, there was no heat in her voice. That was the worst part. It was said with complete indifference. It wasn't an empty threat or an argument spiraling out of control. It was worse than that. It was the truth, a truth she had likely been sitting on for a long time. One that had finally slipped through because she didn't even care enough to filter it anymore. Something clicked in my mind at that moment. All the late nights she spent on her phone, all the plans she made without including me, the way she barely acknowledged my presence anymore. It all made sense now. I wasn't her partner. I was just there, a placeholder in a marriage that had already ended in her mind. I could have argued. I could have asked her what she meant, demanded an explanation, or tried to prove that I wasn't as lucky as she claimed. But what was the point? She had already decided how she felt, and more importantly, she had expected me to just take it. That was the part that stung. Not the words themselves, but the casual way she assumed I would just absorb them, let them settle into my bones like I had done with so many other things over the years. Not this time. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. She barely looked up from her phone, as if she had already moved on from the conversation. Without a word, I walked to the bedroom. My movements were calm, controlled. I wasn't angry. There was no dramatic outburst, no slamming of doors. I simply walked to the closet, pulled out a suitcase, and laid it open on the bed. Piece by piece, I started packing. The sound of hangers sliding against the metal rod, the quiet rustle of fabric as I folded her clothes. I focused on the small details. It kept me steady, kept me from second-guessing myself. A part of me expected her to come in, to ask what I was doing, maybe even laugh like it was some kind of joke, but the minutes ticked by and she didn't move. She wasn't worried. She didn't think I'd actually follow through, and that told me everything I needed to know. So I kept going. I packed the essentials first, a few dresses, some tops and jeans, shoes, enough for her to leave without needing to come back right away. Then I grabbed her toiletries, carefully placing them in a separate bag. I wasn't doing this to be petty. I wasn't going to make a mess of her things or throw them out onto the lawn like some overplayed scene in a bad movie. No, this was different. This was me showing her something she clearly hadn't expected, that I wasn't afraid of her leaving, that I wasn't going to beg her to stay, that I had heard her loud and clear. When I was done, I zipped up the suitcase, lifted it off the bed, and carried it out to the living room. The wheels clicked softly against the floor as I rolled it toward the door. Only then did she finally look up. Her phone was still in her hand, but now she was actually paying attention. Her eyes flicked from the suitcase to me, confusion settling on her face. She blinked. "What are you doing?" I let out a breath and met her gaze evenly. "You said I was lucky you hadn't left yet," I said, my voice steady. "So I'm making it easier for you." I reached for the handle and pulled the suitcase up, setting it firmly by the door. Then I stepped aside and I waited. She didn't move. For the first time in a long time, she actually looked uncertain, not angry, not dismissive, just caught off guard, like she was seeing me in a way she hadn't before. Her eyes flicked between me and the suitcase by the door. I could tell she was waiting for me to break first, to say something that would give her the upper hand, to turn this into just another argument, where she could roll her eyes and walk away, knowing I'd be there when she came back. I didn't give her that. Instead, I just stood there, arms relaxed at my sides, my face unreadable. If she was expecting me to beg her to stay, she was going to be disappointed. If she thought I'd get down on my knees and apologize for something I hadn't even done, she was wrong. Still, she didn't move. Seconds stretched, thick and heavy. I could almost see the thoughts running through her mind. She wasn't used to this. She was used to being the one who held all the power in our relationship. The one who decided when a fight was over, when we talked, when we didn't. The one who could say something like, "You're lucky I haven't left yet," and know that I'd swallow, push it down, let it pass like I always did. But now, standing in front of that open door with her packed suitcase at her feet, she was realizing something. I wasn't playing by her rules anymore. I had no interest in chasing after someone who had already checked out of our marriage, no interest in convincing her to stay when she clearly saw being here as a burden. So I waited. Finally, she crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. Her voice was sharper than before. "So that's it? You're just kicking me out?" I shook my head. "No, I'm just giving you what you want. Her lips parted like she was going to argue, but then she stopped, because we both knew the truth. She had been waiting for me to beg her to stay. She had expected me to panic, to grasp at any last shred of control I had over the situation. But I wasn't doing that, and without my resistance, she had nothing to push against. She glanced at the suitcase, again, and I could see her struggling with the reality of the situation. She had been holding this over my head for so long, treating the idea of leaving like some kind of weapon, something she could dangle just close enough to keep me on edge but never actually act on. Now the choice was right in front of her. All she had to do was pick up the handle, walk out, and prove that she really meant what she had been threatening all this time. I could see the hesitation in her posture, because the second she walked through that door, there was no coming back. She knew it, and I knew it. She took a slow breath, her expression tightening, like she was trying to figure out what the right move was. I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to make this easier for her. If she wanted to go, she could go. But if she wanted to stay, it wasn't going to be on her terms anymore. Her arms tightened across her chest, her nails pressing into her skin. She wasn't just hesitating anymore, she was calculating. I could see it in the way her eyes flickered, scanning my face, looking for any sign of weakness, any crack in my resolve. And then she scoffed. A short, breathy laugh that carried more disbelief than amusement. "You're really doing this," she muttered, shaking her head. "Unbelievable." She didn't move toward the suitcase, didn't step toward the door. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate step toward me. "You're throwing me out because of one comment?" she challenged, her voice sharper now, pressing, testing. "Are you serious?" I didn't react, because we both knew it wasn't just one comment. We both knew this wasn't about a single sentence spoken in frustration. This was about everything that had led up to that moment. Every look of indifference, every sigh of annoyance, every night she turned away from me in bed. Every time she made it clear she saw me as an obligation instead of a partner. She expected me to crack under her words, to react emotionally, to turn this into a fight where she could regain control. But I wasn't playing along. "I'm not throwing you out," I said evenly. "You made it clear you don't want to be here. I'm just making it easier for you." Her jaw tightened, and I saw the flicker of uncertainty return for a brief second before she masked it again. "Do you even hear yourself?" she asked, letting out a dry laugh. "You think you're proving something right now? You think this makes you the bigger person?" I didn't answer, because this wasn't about being the bigger person. This was about the fact that I refused to be the smaller one anymore. Her eyes locked onto mine, waiting for some kind of reaction, something she could use. When I gave her nothing, she took another step closer, her voice dropping into something lower, more measured. "You want me to leave?" she said. "Fine, but don't pretend this is some noble move. Don't act like you're doing me a favor." I still didn't speak. I didn't need to. She hated that. I could see the frustration bubbling under the surface, the way her fingers twitched at her sides like she was stopping herself from lashing out, because this wasn't going how she had imagined. She had spent so much time convincing herself that I needed her more than she needed me, that she could throw out a line like, "You're lucky I haven't left yet," and I would jump through hoops to prove her wrong, to keep her here. She never expected me to call her bluff. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing heavily, her expression a mixture of defiance and something else, something that almost looked like regret, but not quite. Then she exhaled sharply and turned away, pacing toward the couch. She ran a hand through her hair, frustration evident in every movement. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath. I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms, waiting. Because now she had a choice to make, and for the first time, I wasn't going to make it for her. She paced back and forth, her steps uneven, her breathing controlled but heavy. She was stalling, and we both knew it. Her arms remained crossed, her jaw set tight, like she was physically holding herself together. But I could see it. The tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers twitched slightly against her skin. She wasn't leaving, not yet. Because now that it was real, now that the suitcase was packed and the door was open, something was different. She had spent so much time making sure I knew she was willing to leave, dangling it in front of me, a constant reminder that my place in her life wasn't guaranteed. But the moment she was actually faced with the decision, the weight of it settled in, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, doubt. I stayed quiet. If she was going to talk, she had to do it on her own. She finally stopped pacing and turned to me, her eyes burning with frustration. "You want to act like I'm the bad guy here? Fine. But don't pretend this is all on me." I didn't flinch. I never said it was. She scoffed. "That's exactly what you're saying. Packing my bags like you're some kind of martyr, acting like you're just helping me go. But you know what? Maybe I should be the one asking why you didn't leave." I tilted my head slightly. You really want to go there? She folded her arms tighter, but I could see the way her throat moved as she swallowed. Go ahead. Say it. She wanted a fight. She wanted me to lose my temper, to yell, to lash out, because that would be easier for her. If I snapped, she could justify everything. She could walk out feeling like the victim, like she was escaping something unbearable. But I wasn't giving her that, so I just spoke the truth. I didn't leave because I thought we could fix it, I said simply. Because I believed we were still worth something, but I'm not going to fight for someone who doesn't want to be here. Her expression flickered just for a second, then she rolled her eyes and let out a bitter laugh. Wow, that's rich. So now you're the perfect husband, the one who tried, while I just, sat around and waited to leave? I let out a slow breath. You know that's not what I'm saying. She shook her head, looking away, jaw clenched. You act like I wanted this, like I wanted things to get this bad. Didn't you? I asked. Her eyes snapped back to mine, anger flashing. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It means you gave up a long time ago, I said, my voice steady. You stopped trying, you stopped caring. And the worst part? You expected me to do the same. You wanted me to be the one chasing, the one holding everything together, while you just, decided if I was still worth your time. She inhaled sharply, her whole body tense. Tell me I'm wrong, I said, stepping closer. Tell me you haven't been halfway out that door for months. Tell me you weren't waiting for me to give you a reason to walk away. She didn't say anything because we both knew the answer. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, and for the first time, I saw something shift in her expression. It wasn't just frustration. It wasn't just anger. It was guilt. She looked away, exhaling sharply. This isn't fair, she muttered. You think you have it all figured out, don't you? No, I admitted. But I do know one thing. She glanced at me warily. I know I'm done being the only one fighting for this. Her throat worked as she swallowed again, her gaze dropping to the floor. Silence stretched between us, the kind of silence that was heavier than words, the kind that filled up every inch of space and left no room for excuses. She had nothing left to say, and now she had to make a choice. She didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the floor, her arms still folded tightly against her chest, her entire body stiff with the weight of the moment. I could see it, the war happening inside her, the realization that this was real, that she had been so used to holding all the control that she never thought she'd actually have to follow through. And now she had to decide. I didn't push her. I didn't speak. I just stood there, waiting, because whatever happened next had to come from her. Finally, she let out a slow breath. It was shaky, unsteady, but when she looked up at me again, something had changed. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't indignant, wasn't rolling her eyes or scoffing or throwing accusations my way. She just looked lost, and maybe, deep down, she had been lost for a long time. Her gaze flickered toward the suitcase, then back to me. You really think this is the answer? I didn't hesitate. I think it's the only option left. Her lips pressed together, and for a second, I thought she was going to argue, that she was going to pull out one last excuse, one last defense, but she didn't. Instead, she walked over to the couch and sank down onto it, running a hand through her hair. I don't know how we got here, she muttered. I let out a slow breath. I do. She glanced up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Regret. Not just for this moment, but for all the moments before it, for every cold shoulder, every dismissive word, every silent night spent lying next to each other, feeling like strangers. And for a second, a brief, fleeting second, I almost believed she was about to take it back. But then she looked at the suitcase again. She stared at it like it held all the answers she had been avoiding, like it was proof that she had pushed too far, tested too much, and now there was no going back. Her fingers curled against her knees. She was hesitating, not because she didn't want to leave, but because she hadn't expected it to happen on my terms. She had spent so long convincing herself that she was the one in control, that she was the one deciding when and if this marriage ended. But now, she wasn't walking away because she wanted to. She was walking away because she had already lost. And that was something she hadn't prepared for. She took another deep breath, then stood slowly, carefully, like every movement was heavier than it should have been. She walked over to the suitcase, her fingers resting on the handle for a moment, unmoving. Like she was testing the weight of this decision, seeing if she could carry it. Then, finally, she lifted it, and without looking back, she walked toward the door. She reached the door, suitcase in hand, but she didn't open it right away. Her grip on the handle tightened, her knuckles faintly turning white. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremble in her fingers. She was waiting, for what, I wasn't sure. Maybe she was expecting me to stop her, to say something, anything that would give her an excuse to stay. Maybe she wanted a fight, some last explosion of emotion that would justify everything. Or maybe, just maybe, she was realizing that this wasn't how she thought it would feel. But I didn't move. I stood exactly where I was, watching as she lingered in the doorway, staring at the handle like it would give her an answer she didn't have. Then she exhaled sharply and pulled it open. The night air drifted in, cool against the heat of everything that had built up inside that house. It felt almost symbolic. The fresh air rushing in, clearing out the suffocating weight of everything that had led to this moment. She took a step forward, her body stiff, her movements deliberate. But just as she crossed the threshold, she hesitated. Her head turned slightly, just enough that I could see the side of her face. If I walk out, that's it. Her voice was quiet, but there was something underneath it, something almost uncertain. I nodded once. Yeah, that's it. Silence. She didn't ask me to reconsider, didn't try to negotiate, didn't ask if we could fix it. And I didn't offer. Because this wasn't about who was right or wrong anymore. This wasn't about blame or anger or resentment. It was about the fact that whatever we had once been, we weren't anymore. She had tested my limits, pushed me to the edge, and assumed I would always be there, waiting, no matter what she said or did. But she had been wrong, and now she had to live with that. She took a final breath, then stepped forward, letting the door close behind her. The sound was quiet, but it carried more weight than any fight we'd ever had. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the closed door. The suitcase was gone. The presence that had filled this house for so long, the one that had been growing colder, more distant, more detached, was gone. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was the one being left behind. I turned away from the door. The silence of the house settled around me, but it didn't feel empty. It felt lighter. She had walked out, and I wasn't chasing after her. As I watched the door click shut behind her, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't the kind of calm that comes from resolution or victory. It was more like the quiet after a storm that's been raging for years. I stood there in the living room, the air still heavy with the scent of her perfume. Something floral and faint that I'd grown so used to I barely noticed it anymore. But now, in her absence, it lingered like a ghost, reminding me of all the little things that had built up to this moment. I didn't cry. I didn't punch the wall or scream into the void. Instead, I felt this deep, echoing emptiness that wasn't entirely unpleasant. It was like finally exhaling after holding my breath for too long. I walked back to the kitchen, where our half-eaten dinner sat cold on the table. The plates looked pathetic now, remnants of a routine we'd both been pretending to maintain. I scraped the food into the trash, the clink of forks against ceramic sounding louder in the silence. As I rinsed the dishes, my mind started to unravel the knot of emotions I'd been ignoring. Relief was the first one to surface, sharp and undeniable. Relief that I didn't have to tiptoe around her moods anymore. That I wouldn't wake up to another day of wondering if today was the day she'd finally say it again, or worse, just disappear without a word. For months, maybe years, I'd been living under this invisible weight, convincing myself that if I just tried harder, loved more, conceded one more time, things would turn around. But they didn't. And now, with her gone, that weight was lifted. I could breathe. But relief isn't pure, it's tangled with regret. As I dried my hands and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the darkened street, I regretted the time I'd wasted. How many evenings had I spent alone in this house while she was out with friends, or buried in her phone, building a life that didn't include me? I regretted the compromises I'd made, the dreams I'd shelved because we came first, even when we had become a hollow shell. I thought about our wedding day, the vows we'd exchanged under a canopy of white flowers promising forever with starry eyes and naive hearts. Back then, love felt invincible. Now it felt like a faded photograph, something I could look at but no longer touch. Regret burned in my chest, not for losing her, but for losing myself in the process. I'd become a version of me that was smaller, quieter, always accommodating. Who was I without that role? Sadness crept in next, slow and insidious, like fog rolling over a lake. I sat on the couch, the same one where we'd watched movies together in better times, her head on my shoulder, laughing at the same jokes. The cushions still held the imprint of her body, and for a moment, I allowed myself to grieve. Grieve the good moments we'd shared, lazy Sundays in bed, spontaneous road trips where we'd sing off-key to old songs, the way her smile could light up a room when she was truly happy. Those memories weren't erased by the end. They were just overshadowed. I grieved the potential we never realized, the family we talked about but never started, the future we'd sketched out in whispers that turned to dust. Sadness made my throat tight, my eyes sting. But I didn't fight it. It was okay to feel this. It meant what we had was real, even if it wasn't enough. Yet beneath the sadness, There was a spark of anger, quiet at first, then building like a fire fed by dry wood. Anger at her for the indifference, for the casual cruelty in her words, for making me feel like I was lucky to have scraps of her attention. "You're lucky I haven't left yet." Those words echoed in my head, a mantra of manipulation I'd swallowed too many times. Anger at myself, too, for letting it go on so long. Why hadn't I seen it sooner? Why had I clung to the illusion of us when the reality was crumbling? I paced the room, my footsteps muffled on the carpet, letting the anger flow through me. It wasn't destructive, it was clarifying. It reminded me that I deserved more than being someone's afterthought. For the first time, I felt justified in my decision. Packing that suitcase wasn't petty revenge, it was reclaiming my dignity. Anger gave me strength, a resolve to not let this define me. As the night deepened, I wandered into the bedroom, the bed looking too big for one person. I sat on the edge, running my hands over the sheets we'd shared. Loneliness hit then, a wave that nearly knocked me over. The house felt too quiet, too still. No more sounds of her humming in the shower, no more arguments over what to watch on TV, no more shared silences that once felt comfortable but had turned awkward. Loneliness whispered doubts. What if I was wrong? What if she came back begging and I turned her away? But I pushed those thoughts aside. This loneliness was temporary, a bridge to something better. I'd been lonely with her here, after all, lonelier than I ever thought possible. Being alone now was honest, at least. Hope flickered in the midst of it all, tentative but real. Hope for a future where I could rediscover myself. Maybe I'd take that trip to the mountains I'd always talked about, or pick up the guitar gathering dust in the closet. Hope for new connections, for laughter that wasn't forced, for love that felt reciprocal. I imagined waking up without the dread of another indifferent day, pursuing hobbies I'd neglected, rebuilding friendships I'd let fade because we took priority. Hope made the emptiness feel like space, room to grow, to heal, to become whole again. Fear was there too, lurking in the shadows. Fear of the unknown, the logistics of divorce, dividing assets, explaining to family and friends. Fear of starting over in my 40s, wondering if I'd find someone else or if I'd end up alone forever. Fear that I'd made a mistake, that she'd been right and I was the problem. But fear is a liar, I reminded myself. It thrives on inaction. By letting her go, I'd faced it head on. This fear was proof I was alive, pushing boundaries I'd long accepted. Gratitude surprised me as I lay down, staring at the ceiling. Gratitude for the lessons learned, for the strength I'd found in that pivotal moment. Gratitude for the good years, even if they were outnumbered by the bad. Gratitude for the clarity that came from rock bottom. Without this pain, I might have stayed stuck, numbly enduring a half-life. As sleep finally tugged at me, a mix of all these emotions swirled: relief, regret, sadness, anger, loneliness, hope, fear, gratitude. They weren't linear, they overlapped, contradicted, evolved. But in sharing them now, even if just to myself in this empty house, I felt a sense of release. This wasn't the end of me, it was the beginning. I'd survived the storm, and tomorrow I'd start rebuilding. One breath, one step, one day at a time.